Oh, did you have the chicken wings? Oh, got one. Yeah, because we've got another meetup next week. Okay, so we have broadcasting, which is good. Let's just make sure everyone can see. That's good. All right, so everyone's ready to go. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody, for coming along to our August meetup this evening. My name's Simon Waite. A lot of common faces here, so I won't go into who I am and what the purpose of the user group is. I think we're all here and we know what that is. Session agenda for this evening, pizza and beer. I can see everyone's got beer already, so you've probably figured that part out already. It's been a while since we had one of these. Last one was back in May. We had some scheduling challenges with speakers in the meantime, and rather than just making this a session about what's new in Azure, it's always nice to have someone come along and talk about some particular topic. This evening, we're lucky enough to have Jeff Alexander from Microsoft, who's going to talk to us a bit about containers of lots of different varieties. Jeff's probably going to look more closely at kind of the Microsoft story around Windows containers and probably go a little bit over some Docker support and some Azure Container Service features as well. But I'll let Jeff get into that later. We'll get started just by looking at some upcoming events. What I did say just at the top, and you probably, if you missed it, there is another Azure user group next week on Wednesday evening. I won't be running it. Someone else from Cloud will be running it because I have some other commitments. But we're lucky enough to have a gentleman from Kentico who's in town for some business coming to present about Azure Search. Work with Azure Search, or you'd like to know more about Azure Search, go to the Meetup site and register for that next week. We probably won't be live streaming that one, so if you are watching this on a video after this evening's session, recommend that you go to the Meetup site and register for next week. I think we're about 80% full on that event for the time being. And then in September, there's an event that's being run by the Microsoft MVP community here in Sydney. It's called Innovation Day or Innovation Days. That'll be up at St Leonard's New South Wales TAFE. You can go to the website and register. It's free. I'd recommend you go if you're interested. I think they've got 150 slots. I'm not sure where they are in terms of capacity on that. I'll be talking at that about Azure AAD B2C and how you can wrap that into apps that you might be developing in future. And Jeff will be talking there also. I'll be doing a couple of sessions, both kind of the keynote of the day. And what's your other topic you're going to be talking about?
Tossing up between nano server and containers.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So okay.
Because these guys are already going to see containers tonight,
yeah.
So they'll probably want to see
nano server. Nano server and containers. If you're watching the stream and didn't hear that, yeah. So there's 3 different streams on that day with a focus across both IT Pro and Dev streams as well. So as I said, I'll be there. There'll be a bunch of other Microsoft MVPs covering various topics to do with Office 365, Azure, data center components as well. So if you would like to go, please go ahead and register. Or if you know someone who would like to get a day of free training, so it's a full day on that Saturday, please go ahead and register. All right. So let's jump into services that are in preview in Azure. So the way I run these sessions, we'll do in preview, general availability, and then just some general announcements. We've kind of moved away from a lot of stuff going through preview and GA now, and there tends to be more generic announcements about, hey, we've made some changes and some additions to the services, particularly if it's a mature service like, say, media services. There won't generally be a lot of preview services that get launched on top of that because the platform is pretty stable. So they might add a new feature and just simply announce it as effectively being in GA to start off with. Since we last got together in May, however, the N-Series VMs have launched. I don't believe they're yet available in the Australian regions, but they will come hopefully eventually. N-Series is specifically targeted at GPU-based workloads, so particularly good if you want to do a lot of maths type solutions. So things like TensorFlow, which does machine learning based algorithms, use a slightly modified GPU chip and routine to do a lot of their big number crunching and AI logic crunching. So N-series GPUs, N-series VMs are really designed to cope with those sorts of workloads. So worth going and having a look at those. Details are up on the Azure announcements blog. Windows Server containers are now available in preview on Azure Container Service as well. So Docker has been up there and supported for a while. You can now go and have a play with a preview version of Windows Server containers as well. This next one's quite interesting, the media services video OCR. So that's taking a video stream and passing it through media services and allowing it to do optical character recognition out of the video stream, which is pretty powerful when you think about the sorts of use cases that you might put that to. And they're doing some other things around analytics and smarts inside of the video that will really make that kind of a platform to go and look at if you're doing a lot of media processing in the video space. And then finally, alerts and monitoring are now more visible for Azure backup jobs. So not very sexy, but kind of a key component if you're doing a lot of infrastructure as a service workloads in Azure. You're still needing to back those things up, probably treat them more like pets than cattle. Azure Backup is a really good service to do that. Plus, you can also do your on-prem workloads with Azure Backup as well. So this is just surfacing more information about the health of your backup jobs and anything that you might need to be paying attention to. Any questions? Yes? Well, so it's a lot of that sort of stuff is being aimed more at maybe at things like the police, those sorts of markets where they might be needing to do some form of character recognition out of a video stream post an event, perhaps. The example that I think Microsoft publishes is of some underwater craft that are doing pipeline health checks, and they'll actually read like the serial numbers and stuff off of the pipe segments as they go. So it's you can probably think of a few use cases for it, but potentially license plates. I mean, they would do that using. I mean, the ones on the bridge do that here in Sydney. Do that with a snapshot as you go past. They take a still photo, but you could potentially move to a video-based method at a later point in time. It's not going to be 100% real time because clearly that would take a large amount of processing power. But that's really where they want to get to, is to be able to read text strictly out of a video stream. So it's interesting is potential use cases. I'm not sure off the top of my head where you could use that, but if you go and have a read of the announcement for that, they'll give you some examples of where that might potentially be in use, might potentially be useful. And you'll often find that some of these services will have come from an existing use case as well, where Microsoft may have been asked to develop that capability either by a consumer of their service, or potentially they've identified a partner that they may want to go to market with. So example of that is Azure AD B2C, where that the initial consumer of that service was Real Madrid, and that's the big sort of marketing launch partner that they talked about, and that was really the impetus for standing up that capability, was to service the millions of fans around the world that Real Madrid has, and the kind of the B2C service that we now have in Azure was basically, it was already in development, but it was stood up primarily to service that sort of market. So that's where a lot of these services would come from. Generally available. So generally available means it's in Azure, it's backed by SLA, and it generally has a known and published pricing scheme. Whereas in preview, generally you get a cheaper rate or for free, with no service backing, service level agreement backing, or necessarily a support backing. I would say that the in preview services generally get pretty good support from the engineering team responsible for them, because they want the service to be consumed successfully. So I'm building stuff at the moment with in preview services, but you can hopefully get support out of the engineering teams where appropriate. So I guess the big ones out of here, the Azure Security Center is now GA. So if you haven't had a look at that, I definitely recommend going and turning that on. Particularly useful if you run large amounts of virtual machine-based workloads with virtual networking. It'll use, at the premium tier, it'll use heuristics to look at traffic flows and VM behaviors and potentially flag virtual machines or network behavior that you probably want to go and have a closer look at. There will eventually be the ability to pipe a lot of that information into SIEM platforms that you may already have in-house. and have a kind of a holistic picture of the security of the resources that you're running in Azure today. I was talking just a moment ago about Azure Active Directory Business to Consumer. That's now gone GA in North America only. The tenants are available in a range of different regions, but apart from some of the North American data centers, they are still only preview tenants. If you've been working on that today, the good news is eventually you'll get a production-ready tenant. The bad news is that you'll need to re-provision your tenant as a production tenant. You can't take a preview tenant and move it into a production use case. SQL database, we continue to see movement from those guys as well. Azure Active Directory authentication, so you can use Azure AD-based identities now to log into SQL Server Management Studio to manage Azure SQL DB, and also to use username and password type scenarios in your applications. I think the only scenario that supports that at the moment in terms of code is actually down in .NET 4.6, although I believe there are other platforms that will be delivering that capability in due course. Always encrypted is also GA, so that's an interesting new feature where effectively from your application all the way through to Azure SQL database and back again, the data is always encrypted. And the only time it's decrypted is if you want to show that, say, in your application to an end user, where literally they will, you will build a decryptor in your application that will pull the always encrypted data out of the stream, show it to the user. They might do some interaction with it and resubmit that data. It goes back through the encryption tier and is pushed from your application back to Azure SQL DB encrypted, and it sits at rest encrypted as well. So it's that's why it's called always encrypted, because it's always encrypted. The new P15 tier, this kind of came from out of nowhere. That is a beast. So the current previous best before that was, I think, about 1,750 DTUs, which is the measurement of capability in the actual Azure SQL DB instance. The P15 ramps that up to 4,000 DTUs. Unfortunately, it also brings the dollar cost along with it. Monthly in Australia East to run a P15 will cost you $22,000 at rack price. So I'm sure if you talk to your Microsoft account manager, you might get it at a better rate than that, but I suspect probably not a lot less than that. But that's that's really at those extreme performance endpoints that people might want. And while 22K sounds like a lot of money, you want to try to build that capability in your own data center, I'm sure it's going to cost you more than 22K per month to stand that capability up. I would suspect they bill per minute, yeah. So, moral of the story is run your workload and then tear it down really quickly if you can. Just hope you don't have a big data set that takes several hours to be ingested into that environment. And then the last one is premium storage VM backup support. So that's kind of been on the wish list for people doing virtual machine backups with Azure Backup for a while, is that particularly for the new V2 VMs through Azure Resource Manager, you didn't have the ability to do backups of premium storage backed VMs. That's now supported. So you should be all good, hopefully, if you're doing backups of VMs. Any questions? Good? No? Yes?
Microsoft's using
I haven't seen anything specifically related to the use of .NET Core. No, yeah.
Eventually it's moving to Nano Server, is where we're kind of moving towards. That's kind of where we're going to see that going. Eventually we'll see. .NET Core was only just released.
Yeah, so .NET Core, I think probably where you're going with that is, are they going to tear out a lot of the kind of the underlying Windows infrastructure and potentially move it to the .NET platform running .NET Core and potentially something like DNX or what have, or Owen to do the hosting? Potentially. Look, the way the teams implement their stuff internally is entirely up to them. Things like Azure Function Apps, for instance, is actually just built on top of the Azure Web Apps Web Jobs SDK. So there's not a lot of detail in terms of how they've built the underlying capacity for that. But I can assume that at some point in that life cycle there is a web server of some variety, whether that's still running IIS on Windows Server or now Owen on Windows Server, or something like IIS on Windows Server Core. I don't really know, and they don't need to expose that capability. Given .NET, to Jeff's point, given .NET Core is still relatively new, and it doesn't have the full framework baked into it, we'd have to wait and see where they go with that. I think they'd add more language support more broadly for their consumer community than they would focus in on .NET Core rewrites for their own platforms. It would be a lot of engineering effort, probably for not a lot of benefit initially anyway in that space. Any other questions? No? Cool. Last one, and then I'll shut up, and we'll have Jeff get up here to talk about containers for us. So there's just a set of announcements, don't relate to necessarily GA services or in preview services. So Azure Stack, who knows what Azure Stack is? Okay, who was going to use it on their own little VM underneath their desk in their office because it was going to support any infrastructure that you might have lying around spare?
We are talking about Azure Stack.
Yeah, not Windows Azure Pack. We're talking about Azure Stack. Okay, so you probably have not failed to notice the kerfuffle that's come out since Microsoft's kind of turned around and gone, well, we said it was going to be available in 2016. Actually, we realize there's a bit more engineering we need to do on this. We're now going to push it back to the middle of 2017. Oh, and by the way, we said you'd be able to run it on any kit that you had that was compatible. We've decided actually in the first wave that we're going to go to market with partners. And if you've used or seen the existing cloud in a rack capability that I think was available with Windows Azure Pack, it's a fairly similar sort of model. And there's certainly been some friction as a result of that change in approach, because a lot of people went, I'm going to have a lot of spare capacity in my data center once I start moving a lot of workloads to Azure. And I'd like to be able to repurpose that using Stack. That doesn't look like that's going to initially be available. Although, to be fair to the engineering team, they are taking feedback appropriately on that. So hopefully we'll see some changes in attitudes toward that. Maybe we'll get a varying level of support where if you want the kind of the gold level Stack experience, you'll buy a prepackaged Azure cloud in a rack which has Stack and hardware, but you can still take the Stack software and install it yourself. I don't have any visibility on that. I'm just hypothesizing at this point, but that's an interesting one because a lot of people looked at that and went, great, I can finally do something with that kit that I have. The next one is in line with their deprecation policy. Microsoft gave notice a while back they were going to remove some of the older storage API capabilities from the Azure storage libraries. They've now come back around and said, actually, we realize that there's probably more people out there and potentially stuff internally they're using that they're going to need to uplift in order to be able to deprecate this. They haven't said when they're going to do that, but they did say that when they do announce it, there'll be 12 months from that point onwards. So if you have storage-based applications that are consuming the API that was from like 2009, good news is you've still got more than 12 months to worry about re-engineering those things. Bad news is you're going to have to re-engineer them at some point anyway. Next one, blockchain as a service. So there's Mark Rosinovich actually published something via Twitter today about an internal deck he put together for a blockchain offsite he did with senior management at Microsoft. So worth going and having a look for that on Twitter, on his Twitter feed. But blockchain is now available in Dev Test Labs. So Microsoft's really keen to see what people can do with blockchain as a service hosted on Azure. It's kind of got a lot of interest from the sort of the finance and insurance industries with the idea of having an immutable history of changes that have happened to a thing. Has a potential to, revolutionize some things that required a lot of human interaction before. So if you're a lawyer or maybe an actuarial, you're probably a little bit worried about automation taking away your job, maybe in about 30 years' time once we figure out kind of the vagaries of how that works. Azure Usage and Billing Portal, I put this up here because that's actually available out on GitHub. So Microsoft has published this and you can go and use it, pull it down and log in, and it'll visualize your utilization and billing if you have an enterprise agreement. But they've also made the code they wrote for that feature available on GitHub. So you can actually see how they're using the Azure billing and usage APIs that they've had for probably about 6 months to see how they're using those to surface those details. So it's both a new portal experience you can go and have a look at if you need to know what's going on, but it's also a way to maybe build your own things going forward as well using those APIs. Media services and service bus now available via Azure Resource Manager, finally, which means they're in the V2 portal as well. And then finally, who can not forget about Magic Quadrants and certification? So Microsoft's top right in a lot of quadrants in the cloud space, which we're all really happy about because it means that we're consuming, visionary and you're not going to help me here. Visionary, right? Yeah. Yeah, so they're up in that quadrant up there with the usual suspects. So depending on what area you're looking at with IaaS or PaaS or SaaS, there's a combination of players in that space, whether it be AWS or Google. But the good thing is that Microsoft's recognized for its leadership in that space. Although I will say you're only as good as your last Magic Quadrant. So, but and then certification. So clearly, we want to consume cloud services that are certified as being secure and in alignment with many of the international standards around operational support. Microsoft continues to make sure that it has all of those in place. They were, I think, the first cloud platform to get one of the new levels of ISO 27001, which is around security and operations of cloud environments. So they were the first ones to be able to hang their hat on that certification, which is good news. So good for us. Good for your customers or your users as well. All right, I've talked enough. I might take like a couple of minute breaks if you want to grab some pizza or another beer while we do a technical changeover, and we'll get Jeff's machine up, and then we'll get him talking. So thanks a lot for your time, and we'll get we did. Yeah, it's good. It actually comes from Microsoft.com as well.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, there's a photo of you from Microsoft on. Yeah.
Super excited.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So grab some pizza and beer, and we'll get Jeff up here in a couple of minutes. Yep.
Testing 1 2 3.
Yeah,
Testing
okay.
1 2 3.
All right.
We're ready to rock and roll.
Everyone, off to Jeff. Thank you very much.
Okie dokie. Hello, everyone. Is that it? That's all we get. Nothing else. So you guys got beer, you got food, Coke, whatever else. So you're all good to hear about containers. Hello to. Are you saying hi to people? How many people are on the live stream?
We got one viewer on the live stream.
Well, hello to the one person who has nothing better to do online watching us at this particular thing. So for those of you that don't know me, I know a lot of people in the room, but for those of you that don't know who I am, my name's Jeff Alexander. I'm a senior technical evangelist at Microsoft. That's my about.me page. So if you want to get me on LinkedIn or Twitter or social media, that's where you can connect to me on that. Next week is my 29th year anniversary at Microsoft. So 29, I know you get less time for murder and you get out on good behavior. So anyway, so my focus in my role right now, the team that I'm in right now, I've been in this job, the evangelism role for about 12 years. I come from the ops side of the fence. Okay, so I was a data center manager for our data centers in Australia and New Zealand when we did physical servers, right? So how many of you still have a lot of physical servers in your environments today? Yeah,
People still have physical servers? You must have, right? You have to have physical servers, right? We didn't really do any virtualization at that time. And then I started out in this role as an IT pro evangelist. So I focused on the IT pro audience. Now, in this financial year, I am now DevOps. How many of you have heard that term, DevOps? How many of you guys are dabbling in the world of DevOps? Yeah, okay. A few people using Puppet, Chef, Docker, Kubernetes, any other ones, Ansible. We've been going to a whole shit ton of user groups, so we know all these topics. I'm kind of in the world of DevOps, CI/CD, and Docker and containers. So this session kind of fits into that particular conversation around what we're doing in this space. So I'm going to talk to you about, first of all, what we're doing in the Windows Server space and also on Windows 10. So how many of you are running Windows 10 on your, anybody updated to the anniversary update?
Yes.
Okay. Do you now know that you have containers in the anniversary update? Okay, so you've played around with that. So you have containers now in the anniversary update. And I've got a PowerShell script that I'm going to show you through how you can configure that and play around with containers on Windows 10. I'll share that with you guys somehow on the Meetup page, so you can use that PowerShell script and go through and actually play around with it and set it up. And then we'll talk about our partnerships that Microsoft has with Docker. Okay, so we're doing a lot of work with Docker right now. We announced some stuff in 2014, believe it or not. It's that long ago that we announced our partnerships with Docker, and we're doing a lot of work with Docker. And then briefly, we'll talk about the Azure Container Service, and also the stuff about how you can actually play around with containers. Anybody played around with containers on other operating systems at this point? Linux? How long has it come out? Who invented containers? Anybody know? Everybody thinks it's Docker. I think it was IBM or back in the 60s or something like that. So, hey, what's that?
That's a dirty word in Australia at the moment, IBM.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I did my census. It was really funny. I did my census. I found it really interesting at the census. I was filling out my census form. I'm doing it online, right? What was the last question? Does everybody in your house have internet access? Are you freaking kidding me? I'm filling out an online form. What's going on? I was able to submit mine. And then I think 8 o'clock came around, everybody was putting their kids to bed, and it just went down like that. So anyway, apparently they got $9 million for that. Good investment, don't you think? So there you go. All right, so now I'm going to set the scene with how containers has come about from a Microsoft perspective and what we're doing in this space, okay? And really where this has come about. How many of you consider yourself developers? Okay? How many of you guys are like IT professionals or ops kind of people? You guys talk to your ops folks? The developer guys? You just chuck shit over the fence and go, here, deal with that, work it out, right? Give them an Azure subscription and away they go, all right? Okay. Look at that face, isn't that gorgeous? Did you break it? So that one person's going, I can't see it.
Yeah, they might well.
There you go. There you go.
What's the ABS?
I know why that's.
Or IBM?
Do you want to just do it that way? Yeah.
Show your. I might just.
All right. Okay, so a few of you are developers. So developers move these days particularly at a much faster pace than IT operations tend to do. How many of you have heard the term shadow IT? Yeah? What is shadow IT? You get the shits with operations because they can't provide you with what you need. You go around them, you put your services in the cloud, and then you never come back. We used to call them skunk works at Microsoft when I was in internal IT. So you need to create your applications, and you often hear developers say, well, the application runs really great on my machine. What's your problem? Why isn't that working on your stuff, right? And, you know, if IT is blocking developers, their innovation is blocked. They're not able to deliver their applications. IT tends to run in this keep it stable. If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality, right? They want to make sure that they want to keep these systems running, and they're not sure
how to integrate unfamiliar applications, and they require a lot more help from the developers. What we're saying in regards to DevOps is that ops folks need to get involved in the conversation much more earlier in the process. All right. So, you know, there's a lot of things around server protection and compliance. So this new notion of what we call containers. Can I hide this? I can't. There we go. So we want to be able to empower developers to create things at the rate that they're trying to do it without disrupting what IT is doing. Okay, so that's kind of where we're kind of getting to, is we want to be able to give them that kind of functionality without doing that. And so that's where kind of containers has come in. Okay, so we first introduced containers in Windows Server in Technical Preview 3. Okay, so Technical Preview 5 is currently out. We are pretty much code complete with Windows Server right now. From a development point of view, we're code complete with Windows Server. Technical Preview is just getting cumulative updates kind of thing. And so that's kind of where we are with that. We have containers in Windows 10. That's going to be really good for developers because you can develop your applications inside a container, okay? And then you can run that anywhere. And that's the whole goal of what we're doing with containers. All right, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we're actually doing. So typically, this is containers are a new approach in the way that we build, ship, and instantiate the applications that we need to provide to the business. Okay, when I was in our internal IT department, our traditional way that we did this was a one-to-one relationship. It was actually a one-to-two relationship. We had a server, and then we had a test server that we had to run side by side for that application. We had a ratio of one application to that. And then virtualization kind of took off in the mid-2000s, right? Didn't really take off with us. I remember I was out there talking about Hyper-V in the 2008 eras. I had a lot of bruising at that point from VMware, so that was a lot of fun. I participated in some smackdowns with VMware. That was a lot of fun. They basically said, you don't do this, you don't do that, bye-bye, see you later. But we're now getting better. So we got higher consolidation ratios and better utilization with virtualization. Enterprises typically saw a 50% increase in the utilization of their servers, because in this scenario where you're running applications on physical servers, the servers themselves are utilized about 10 to 12% on average in enterprises. That moves up to 50% when you're talking about virtualization. What containers actually does is allows us to package our apps into a virtualized space where we virtualize the kernel. Okay, nested virtualization becomes a very important part of this, right? So this reduces the time. We can further accelerate your app deployment. It's a lot faster. Containers start more quickly. They tear down more quickly. There's a reduced effort to deploy apps. We're integrating this, the Docker engine, into Visual Studio. If you develop with Visual Studio, we have a preview for that as well. And it's lower costs associated with this. And you can run many, many containers on the one system. Well, what we'll see, the goal of this really is to end up with increased higher rates of consolidation, higher rates of density by running containers. Okay. By the way, I'm happy to take questions as we go through. So if you're happy to do that, interrupt me as we go along. So why containers? I talked about the DevOps conversation. All right. So this really fuels into the DevOps conversation. DevOps covers a whole gamut of things, and that's a topic we can cover on a whole bunch of other different topics in regards to that. Containers is another piece in your kit bag when it comes to DevOps. All right. So containers unlock productivity. It enables you to do, really, truly enables you to do write once and run anywhere applications. Okay. So if you're going to develop an application and you're going to develop that application inside a container, you can take that containerized app, that package, run it in Azure. Okay. Run it in a VM running in Azure that has the container service. Right. Run it on your machine in containers in Windows 10. Run it in Linux, right? Can be deployed as a multi-tier distributed application in Azure, IaaS, or PaaS modes, whichever you want to do. It's a powerful abstraction for microservices. You've probably heard that term microservices as we've talked about before. And this is the service fabric in Azure that's supporting the microservices capability. Now, operations likes containers because it gives them an opportunity to use the same deployment model that they have right now. Provides standardized environments, allows them to get involved in development Q&A. It abstracts those OS distributions from the underlying infrastructure. When we talk about virtualization, we are virtualized. We have a hypervisor that sits in between that, right? With this, we are virtualizing the kernel, and I'll talk about what we're doing that in Windows Server. Higher utilization, so they get better bang for their buck out of the servers that they're using, and they get rapid scale up in response to changing scale up and scale down business changes. Now, when you talk about DevOps, I think, is the biggest part of DevOps is cultural change. So how many of you raise your hand, you said you were doing kind of DevOps-y things in your organization? What are you specifically doing in that space when it comes to DevOps? Is there a DevOps team, or is there just something you guys do?
Our team, everyone is
So people are responsible for both dev and ops, okay?
We have a ops team, which is part of the release engineering.
Okay, so you have a DevOps team.
Yeah. Everything is we manage that and we talk to the IT ops and the developers and the QAs.
Do you have DevOps roles? Do you have DevOps roles within the organization?
Yeah.
It's just interesting. I've been reading a lot of stuff about DevOps, and it's interesting you say you have a DevOps team, because doing it that way means that team's responsible for it and nobody else is. What DevOps is about is the whole organization has to use these practices. So a lot of what I've been seeing is that don't have DevOps roles. DevOps is a movement. It's more of a cultural change. It's about process. It's about people. There's a whole bunch of tools that are out there. Microsoft is heavily pushing into the open source world. I'm the content owner for Ignite. How many of you go to TechEd/Ignite event? Yeah. All right. We will have an open source track this year at Ignite for the first time. That's how much we are putting into open source at Microsoft. So we are doing a lot of work in this space. So operations folks need to focus on standardizing the infrastructure. Automation is a big piece of this, and developers focus on building their apps, continuous integration, continuous delivery with Visual Studio Team Services. But so the containers, when you look at containers, so this is kind of how containers, this is agnostic to the operating system that's actually running. Okay, so every application will have its own dependencies, which includes software, service libraries, CPU, and the actual application, if you look at this container here, it thinks that it has a copy of the operating system. If you do a DIR, when you spin up a container and you do a DIR on the container, you're going to see a Windows directory. You're going to see a directory because we virtualized the kernel itself. All right. So it thinks that it has its own operating system. So that container, we have our app A running with bins, and changes to that don't affect other containers. All right. So they're completely isolated from each other. All right. So that's a strong isolation capability. The container engine is really a lightweight virtualization mechanism which isolates the applications on a per application by packaging them into what we call virtual containers. So in Windows case, Hyper-V becomes very important because of nested virtualization. Okay, so we're able to use a very lightweight version of Hyper-V to nest that virtualization to allow us to do that. On Windows 10, if you're using containers on Windows 10, the default isolation mode is Hyper-V. Okay, so we abstract that again using Hyper-V. All right, it's a small lightweight engine that we do that. Then we have what we call a shared host OS. All right, this is processes are isolated from other containers in what we call user mode in the user space, but they share the kernel with the host and other containers. All right, so we have that capability, giving us to have much higher density in that regard. The good thing is that it's very flexible. Our differences in the underlying operating system are abstracted. It gives you this deploy anywhere type of approach. All right. So they're super fast. If you've been playing around with this, you can create them almost instantly. All right. VMs take a while to get created because there's a whole bunch more overhead with a VM than what you would have with a container. All right. So there's a whole bunch more in regards to that. So these are the things they have: fast iteration, desired state separation, resource controls, rapid deployment. All right. How do they differ from virtual machines? All right. The virtual machine has a hypervisor layer. Okay. And with Windows Server, we have about 130 megabytes. If you've ever had to study for exams, you probably had to do this. It's around about, I think the hypervisor is about 110 to 130 meg in size. So very small. We don't put anything in the hypervisor or anything like that. Then we have to have a guest OS. And on that guest OS, we run a container inside that. We run the container inside that guest operating system. This gives us another layer of isolation. So there might be organizations that have much more stringent requirements like HIPAA or those kind of things. There might be they might have to have further isolation. So we have Hyper-V containers in Windows Server 2016. So we have Windows Server containers and Hyper-V containers. All right. So each virtualized app includes the app itself, required binaries, and oftentimes what you end up with, for example, a server core image is what, 3 or 4 gigabytes in size. So you run a server core image and you install the container feature in your server core image. Nano server itself is only 400 megabytes in size. If you haven't been playing, if you haven't played around with that, that's kind of where we're moving towards, is this smaller footprint with Windows Server, with Nano server. We don't need the fax service, for example. So we've taken all that crap out, made it a lot smaller. So the thing about this is that you can have an independent OS, right? Whereas if you're using the Windows Server container feature, you have to have the same OS. You can't use a Linux container on a Windows Server host OS, okay? Whereas if you're running Hyper-V containers, you can run a independent OS from the host itself. All right, so there are some differences in regards to that. We get some ability to do migration, flexibility. We get higher levels of isolation with virtualized workloads. All right, simply because we do stuff in there from a virtualization point of view. So containers and virtual machines. Now, by combining these containers with VMs, users can deploy them multiple operating system, multiple containers within those guest operating systems. So here what you're saying is we've got a virtual machine and we've got a couple of different containers running in this. All right, so we can run multiple containers within that. You could have fewer VMs and they could support a larger number of apps by running the containers inside that. All right. We have some features like live migration, that kind of thing that's there. Now, Windows Server containers. A little bit different. You notice that we don't have the hypervisor there. All right, this is a feature that you add to Windows Server. All right, it's basically you can do it through PowerShell, or you can go and do it through add remove features. Right. So developers, how many of you said developers? Visual Studio, develop your application in Visual Studio. Write your apps to run within the containers. Take that, package it up, and you can drop it into this. Like for example, you could use Docker Compose to create a multi-tiered application running with multiple different containers. All right. So in this case, we've got a web tier, an app tier, a DB tier. So you as a developer, you're building modular apps. You may be only working on the DB tier. You worry about that piece. And then we use tools like Docker to stitch them together. All right. They can scale independently and be updated on independent cadence. Okay. Going forward, yeah, go for it.
How much stuff gets packaged with your app into a container inside your app?
That's pretty much it. I mean, so the question for the one person that's on the thing, so I'll repeat that. Is he still there?
We got 6 viewers now.
We got 6 viewers. Woohoo! Rocking in a free world. So, yeah, no worries. So the question's around how many, what is actually packaged up with our application in that container, right? All the application. If you look at so your live application plus any binaries that go with that application.
Say, for example, your app needed .NET Framework 4.6.2, and that on the server that's going to host that container, would therefore your app not work?
So the question is, if your app required the .NET framework, well, generally that's going to be available on your host OS, right? So that's going to share that what's available in the kernel. So you won't have to package that up available to it, right? So as long as you've got it in the host, you should be fine.
If it's not on the host, you're not fine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now, this is where the libraries come in. All right. Okay, so you could put that, you could share that, those libraries get shared across containers, right? So the .NET framework could be shared across all those different containers to be used. So you can define CPU usage, resources per container along with storage. I'll show you some networking capability, provide NAT or DHCP for network connectivity to those containers as well. So this is the DevOps kind of conversation about how we actually do the flow of creating containers. So developers build and test their apps in containers using familiar environments like Visual Studio. And then we push them to a repository GitHub, central repo on GitHub, right? Gets pushed to that particular central repository. Operations then can use Visual Studio Team Services, either online or locally, to automate the deployment using continuous integration or continuous delivery to automate that and monitor those apps as well. We even have the ability to monitor containers with OMS. If you've heard of Operations Management Suite, we have a container for Operations Management Suite. I'll show you that. That then gets pushed out to either our physical or virtual servers. And remember, with Windows Server, containers can either be on physical servers or they can be on virtual machines. All right, so either way that you want to do this. All right, and then that gives you that continuous integration and delivery. Now, this is the tricky part. Operations collaborates with developers. Yeah, I know, right? Are you kidding me?
Cats and dogs living together.
Mass hysteria, right? It's the end of the world. Mass hysteria. Guy, it has to happen to get to this, because if you want to read something about DevOps, go and read Puppet. Every year releases their State of DevOps report. And they release that every year, and they just released the 2016 one. And it talks about highly functioning companies and how much they are performing compared to companies that are not using these types of practices. And it's staggering, like 200 times more deliveries. For example, our Bing team, if you use Bing, you probably don't. You probably use Google. So the Bing team does 4,000 deployments per week, right? That's purely because of DevOps and the way that they've changed their processes. And if you go to stories.visualstudio.com, you can watch some videos about what they do and how they used to do it. Think about Windows 10. We can't go into this continuous delivery of operating system. We already have released a new Insider build beyond Redstone 1. It's the first Redstone 2 build. That's done because of, we can get on that because of how we are using DevOps practices internally. That's a real good example of this kind of thing that we're actually doing. The creation and deployment and continuous deployment of not only operating systems that we're doing, but applications that you're deploying out as well. Gives you that capability to do that. So developers will update, iterate that, and essentially allows us to go through the whole process and keep that continuous delivery that we want to make sure that we update. We can automate that whole process with Visual Studio, automating the update. As soon as a check-in happens, the application's updated automatically. All right? So you have that capability. Now, if you look at the comparison, this is really just an eye chart for you guys to kind of understand what we're actually doing in comparison of each of these. If you look at the base image, okay, so with Windows Server, we have this concept of what we call a base image. And you can do a Docker pull Microsoft / and the name of the image they actually want to get pulled down, right? So with Windows Server containers, it's the same as the host. Right now, we have Nano Server and Windows Server Core. Quite big. It's about 9 gigabytes. For some reason, in the container, I think they're trying to get that smaller, but right now, that's where it's sitting. On Windows 10, you can only play around with the Nano Server image. So if you started playing around with this and you're wondering why the Windows Server Core one won't work, it doesn't work yet on Windows 10. You have to use Nano Server for that, which is fine. That's kind of where we're heading. Linux is the same as the host. Now, see, this is the difference between whether you're running containers without the hypervisor versus with the hypervisor. If you're running it in virtual machines, it means you can run any Windows Linux container on top of that. And this is where you get your multi-tenancy security. So for those organizations that have a higher level of security that they need, that's where they would use Hyper-V to have a different isolation mechanism, right? Density, you get higher with containers than you do with virtual machines. Startup times, I don't believe we've published any specific startup times. The only thing I've seen around startup times is Nano Server versus Windows Server Core versus a full version of Windows Server, and it's quite dramatic. So I'm kind of throwing in a little bit of Nano Server, sprinkling, a little bit of Nano Server in here every now and again. So disk footprint, much smaller than when you talk about virtual machines. All right, so those are sort of the comparisons you can use for this. I will share these slides.
Slides aren't updating. They're on the video, so
I will update.
You, but they can't see what you're updating.
Oh.
2 people.
I gave up. All right. Yeah.
Does that mean you're better off using Docker rather than virtual machines or scale? Sort of for real-time scale. Shorter stuff.
So the question is it better to use?
Say Docker, like
It's going to depend. It's going to depend upon what the application needs are, what the needs are of the business from a security point of view. If you look right now at Technical Preview 5 of Windows Server, you can go in and you can use PowerShell for a lot of the management we're doing with containers. But you'll see that a lot of our PowerShell stuff is getting deprecated in favor of Docker. Okay, so we're moving everything sort of over to Docker right now. And that's kind of where we're moving towards. But are you saying whether you should use a VM versus a container? It's going to be it's going to be this piece here, multi-tenant security. You know, if you need, yeah, go for it.
And also the startup time, it really taxes you when you want to go fast, and then things don't work out. You have to end up using hours in that.
Yeah, and that.
You use containers. The faster they boot up, the faster you get your phone.
Yeah, and we're all thinking in sort of spinning down environments and starting. So if you say have a spot,
Containers are good for that. Yeah. Like for example, and I'm going to show you a little bit later when I'm going through a few slides and then going to kind of switch over to demo and stuff. In the Azure Container Service, we have Apache Mesos and Swarm up there. That allows you to scale up and down really quickly. I can't quite get to the web page that shows me how to do that. Some of our instructions that we have online are kind of a little bit, it's kind of like GitHub. It's not quite up to date. But if you want to learn about containers, and you're on a machine, or you just go to aka.ms/containers, and that takes you to a web page that takes you to a whole bunch of different quick starts for both Windows 10, Windows Server, Docker, all that kind of stuff. So it takes you through a couple of. Now, some of the stuff doesn't work, which is why I've got this PowerShell script that I'm going to show you that'll take you through some of the stuff that you can play around with on Windows 10. So with Hyper-V containers. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry. So the question is our container stuff based on Docker, or is it just Docker compatible? So there's a session I'm going to filled in. One of the things that I would suggest you watch if you get a chance is I don't know if you guys watch stuff on channel9.msdn.com. There's a containers channel up on channel 9. And there's a talk by one of the guys in the product team that talks about what we did underneath in regards to Docker integration into Windows Server. Their first thoughts were, hey, we're Microsoft, we're going to do containers the way we want, right? And they quickly learned that they had to turn this around in a different direction. So Windows was adapted to Docker, not the other way around. So it's deep integration, changes to the kernel. It is a Docker engine. Docker-D, the daemon is running inside Windows. Okay? Think about now we have Bash on Windows 10. Okay? So I don't know if you guys know that, but we have Bash now on Windows 10. You can basically add the full, we partnered with Canonical on that. It is a full Bash. You won't have to have a MacBook to do Bash stuff. You can now have a Surface Book, okay? So everything's good. So how I slip those things in? I slip those things in. Hey, look, I haven't been at this company this long there's a reason. There's a reason. It's not blind. I don't think some of it's blind luck, but my wife keeps saying whenever there's redundancies, why don't they make you redundant? I'm like, really? You want me around that much? I'm not going. If I'm there a week, and she's getting annoyed with me. Anyway, so Hyper-V. The good thing about this is that if you are using Windows Server containers, you don't have to change anything when you move over to Hyper-V containers. All you do is put a flag when you run the container. Isolation equals Hyper-V. Runs the same, but it adds that extra layer. We take a very small VM that we spin up using the hypervisor. You won't see it in the Hyper-V manager, but it is isolated. Okay, and this is the nested virtualization. You'll see what we do is if you go into Task Manager, you'll see a service. And it was funny when I was watching the demo, the guy said it didn't have a name. I think they've given it a name now. There was this thing that was just there running, but it's suspended. We freeze it so that when you're creating new, later on, you can do that later on at that point.
So this gives us the isolation that we want. Okay, so we turn on isolation. We are now running a guest operating system that's optimized for the Hyper-V container engine to run. Okay, that gives us the compliance and the security that we need to isolate that. All right, so let's have a look at containers. So this will tell me whether hopefully my PowerShell script is, you need to do anything here? Or?
Yeah, I'm just going to see if we can get your screen share.
Pause for a moment while we ask questions before we do demos. Yeah.
Like in Docker, you have the capabilities thing, which is kind of tied to the Linux side of things, which is
The capabilities thing. I'm a little bit new to Docker, so if I have a holes in Docker, I apologize. I'm still kind of ramping up on a lot of the Docker stuff. I do come from a long history of Windows, so this is all, some of this is new, but
Capabilities is basically aspects of.
oh, okay. Okay.
So I just wanted to know if that was.
So what you see is what everyone sees at the moment.
Oh, okay, cool. No worries. All right, so I'm going to start kind of, it might come out with what I'm going to show you. All right, so let's do that. So just so you can kind of see what I've got the anniversary update on this machine. And I've got now I'm going to have a few different command prompts and PowerShell things open because some things don't work very well in the integrated scripting environment. Okay, so if you're ever doing a lab and instruction says to go to the command line, don't run Azure, the integrated scripting environment, because sometimes things work funky in there. Some of it does work, some of it does, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this script is really just to allow you to step through the things that you need to run containers on Windows 10. It's same as it is on Windows Server. Okay, so first of all, you're going to need optional feature, which is containers. All right, so you need to add that. Need to run that, and you'll have that ready to go. Once you have that on, then you've got the container feature in. Okay, so remember I'm running this on Windows 10. It tells you the major revision number of this, which is version 10. Doesn't give you any more than that. Okay, and then you're going to need Hyper-V. All right, so you're going to need Hyper-V because of the nested virtualization and the ability to, on Windows 10, it is the built-in, it's the built-in mode for containers on Windows 10. Then what you need to do, and there's a couple of different ways you can actually do this. In this case, I'm doing a bits transfer, mainly because so that I have that container image locally on my machine, so I don't have to do you can do a Docker pull if you want to. All right, so you can do a Docker pull, Microsoft/nano server, and it'll pull down the image itself, which is about 300 meg into your local repository. All right, so you pull down that, and I've just happened to do that in this way with the thing. And then what you're going to need to do is do a new directory for Docker. Okay, we're going to download the Docker daemon and the Docker client. All right, so those two things that downloaded to my machine. Now, you all probably know that Docker has a client. They have a Docker for Windows. Right? Does anybody know there's a beta that's been out for Docker for Windows? That's a little bit different. That runs a Linux VM underneath, right? Okay, so you run a Linux VM. If you look, I've got it installed on this machine. So that's a much higher overhead than what containers are specifically. But it does allow you to develop. You see, you get a Moby Linux VM. I guess that's Moby Dick. Is that the whole whale thing? They seem to be very much into whales. So we've already done that. I've already downloaded Docker D. I've expanded it. You have to add the environment variable. Okay, so you set your environment variable to program files Docker. Then what you want to probably do is have a look at, one of the things to get used to this is to kind of look at your networking capabilities on your host, and then look at your networking that you're going to be using for Docker itself. At that point, you need to register the service. Okay, so you need to do a Docker D -register -register service, and then start Docker. And then once you do that, you can do that. And I can sort of run things like Docker network ls. Okay, and you'll see that I've got a network ID. There's a NAT driver that's been set up. I can go and look at my host IP config. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, so these are my 10.10. What I'm going to create is containers are going to have the 172 addresses for those containers, because all our IP addressing is inside the container is different from the host. All right, so we need to tag it. I've already done the tagging of the image itself. I can now go and do a Docker images. So I'm going to list all my different images that I've got here. The other thing I can do is Obviously, if a few of you are familiar with Docker, this is where we are storing up on hub.docker.com, is we are storing all of our repositories. What are they up to now? About 10, 12,000 different container images in all different areas. All right, we've got Ubuntu, we've got Nginx, we've got a whole bunch of different containers. If you do a Docker search, and you look under Microsoft, this is what we have right now for our containers. We have Ruby on Rails, we have a sample Golang. What other ones we've got here? We've got a sample Python, MongoDB, MySQL. There's a .NET Nightly, there's a sample .NET Core as well that you can play around with. There's Nginx, different sample ones. There's Redis Cache. Interesting one there is application insights. So if you are developing applications and you want to get insight, want to get performance telemetry data on the application, add application insights to your application. Then your ops team will be able to know what's going on with an application. So they have a better answer to the question, the application's running slow. So they can actually know what's going on. So, and we also have an OMS one in there, I believe, which I was gobsmacked when I saw that one, Microsoft OMS. Monitor your containers using Operations Management Suite. You see the Nano Server one there, so if you want to do a Docker pull, you can pull that Nano Server one and away you go from there.
Can you try this? Fails every time I
What's that? Yeah, I did it. It was fine. I did a Docker pull on the Nano Server, and that was okay. Yeah, I can't do it in here because it's already there. So I will. It was this week. Yeah, it was this week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a container and run a program. Okay. Now you notice I got two different ones here. So I do a Docker run dash IT dash name. I have to get used to this double dashes that they use with Docker. I'm used to single dashes in the Windows world. I'm going to call it Docker demo and then Nano Server CMD. Right. So go ahead, and this is going to use my Nano Server. Oh, actually, I didn't want to run that there. Can't stop it though, can I? This is the tricky part. Maybe I'll do a.
It's a bit like as well.
Yeah. See how that goes funky? Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to copy this guy. So let's stop that. I'm going to copy this guy. And I need to go and get my other command prompt, right? All right, which we can do a Control V directly. Isn't that great? Do we have that now in Windows 10? Welcome to the 21st century, Microsoft. Jesus. All right, so we're going to use isolation for, oops. Did I miss a command there? No, it should be okay. It's all right. I'll do it out of a PowerShell.
Isolation space.
I think so, yeah. Let me just, it may not have copied properly. No, that should be right. See, when you do this out of PowerShell, it changes the command prompt. Command prompt is a bit weird, so I have to kind of go like this. And then do it again, and it kind of is half blue and half black, so there we go. Okay, so if I do a PowerShell, so now we are in get-service, right? You should see this is based on our Nano Server image, right? So you can see the number of services that are actually currently running, all right? Now, if you were using Server Core, this would be a hell of a lot more. So the goal is for us, so we're really kind of pushing people towards this Nano Server type of scenario where we're going to get a smaller number of services running because we want to run what's core and what's needed for the container. All right, so we don't want to have that heavy over that footprint of running that on that. So if I go and look at, for example,
we do where is that? Now, if you're not used to containers, if I do a dir inside of here, what you end up seeing is a full Windows directory, okay? If I do an ipconfig inside here, remember my host was getting that 10.10, that was my IP address that I was getting with my internal IT. Now you can see this container is getting a 172 address, okay? That's what we're using for the containers themselves. If I do a dir, that container thinks that it's getting an entire Windows operating system there, right? And then if I go, let me see if I can get Task Manager running. And we go to details here. What you'll end up seeing is because we're running with Hyper-V, you're going to see a couple of, multiple SVC hosts running. You'll also, if I move this by name, so our Docker engine's running. I think it was, I can't remember what they named it to, but when the guy was doing the demo, he noticed that it wasn't any name at all, and it was suspended, right? So if we go and view suspended ones, you'll actually see the suspended ones that are there for our container itself.
Bottom of your screen now, there's 2 suspended.
Oh, that's why I wanted to actually move it by status. That's what I wanted to. Yeah, we can. See VMM, these two here, right? Now, if I'm going to go and do I'm going to create a text file inside this and then create a container from that base image, and the text file will follow that container to that new image. All right, so that we're freezing that at that point in time, right? So let's get out of there, and let's exit this guy. Now, once you exit that, we're out of there. We shouldn't see. Okay, see one left. I think that's that other one that I've got running that I kind of messed up and did it in PowerShell, in integrated scripting environment. Okay, so we still got one running. Then what we can do at that point is, let's just do see if we can do a clear screen on this. Do a Docker PS. All right, so what we're saying is that our container ID, the image that it's using, and the name that we've given it, Docker demo. Okay, so that container is currently running at this point in time. All right, and then if we shut it down, we could do a Docker PS-A, and we could see that container there as well. So I'm gonna do that. So let's do a Docker start. I don't think this is working. I think I might have to. Okay, so that's started, and then we're going to go do an attach. I should have done that from the other PowerShell window. This is the moving back and forth between PowerShell windows. Should come up in a sec.
Questions for comments?
Should do.
So just to be clear, all those Docker commands you're issuing, Docker service server.
Yeah.
Not the original Docker from the Linux world.
Well, if you look at this, it's on my machine. Okay, so I have a program files. I have a Docker folder. I have Docker and I have Docker D there. I also have the Docker client installed because I'm playing around with that as well. So I'm running all these commands natively in Windows, and we have compiled this to work in Windows. All right, we've taken those and we've compiled it we've changed a few things in Windows to make sure that that's going to work fine and work okay in Windows. So the idea is that we want to make sure that this is going to be a native experience for the vast majority of people that are already used to using Docker right now, and they've been using it on other platforms. We don't want this to be something that you're going to have to relearn. You can take your skills and you can use this on Windows if you want to.
So it's not the same. The way we're doing this is not the way we did it 5 years ago. You would have never seen any of this kind of stuff going on in Windows. Right now, what we're doing now. So it's a lot better.
Windows native.
Yeah.
Can you run Linux containers?
Okay. So not at this point. So the container has to be the same as the host OS at this point in time. You can do it with Hyper-V from an isolation point of view. Okay, so you could spin up a VM.
I've development stuck in my laptop. It's .NET, so on IIS.
Mhm.
So Postgres running on Linux.
Mhm.
Can I do that?
Yep. I mean, this is going to give you a much. I'm going to Control C this, and I'm going to try to run that. Just do a Control C from that. So much faster when there's nobody watching.
You're waiting into the demo gods before you started the season.
I went through this a couple times.
You're waiting.
Waiting patiently, this is going to happen. Anyway, I'll show you. I'll hey, aren't they? Thanks, Mike. I love it when you're piling on. That's just great, So, what I'm going to explain kind of what's going on here. What we're going to do here is that what I was going to do here is that once we attach that demo file to it, we're going to do an ipconfig, and then we're going to do an ipconfig and pipe that out to ipconfig.txt. Then we're going to display the contents of that file so we know that it's actually there. And then we're going to do a commit. We're going to exit that console image, right? So we've exited that console image. We've got our base container because we've got our base container image, which is our Docker demo. We're going to do a Docker commit, Docker demo to a new container image. And then we're going to spin up, then I would spin up that container itself, Docker run, and we're going to do this new container image and the ipconfig file. That's how us being able to freeze that state and be able to use it for later on. Okay, so that's kind of where I was getting to with that at the end of that. You can try that out, and it actually does work. And then I've added some remove capability. So if you want to try this over and over again, you can go Docker rm Docker demo and then rmi to remove that image and the new container image. Okay, and then verify the deletion of. So if you have to go and show somebody this, you can go do that. The other way that the other things we're actually doing with containers themselves is the easiest way for you to do that is if you go to aka.ms/containers. This is our quick start that tells you all about our prerequisites and everything you need for containers itself. So there's a whole bunch of concepts, terminology, Windows Server images, and a Windows 10 quick start. Now the Windows 10 quick start is kind of a little bit iffy. There's some comments in there that I've been commenting to say, hey, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. But if you do this one here, the easiest way for you to play around with this, how many of you have an Azure subscription somewhere, right? Just do this. It's an ARM template, okay? Deploy to Azure. What this will do is this will deploy a ready, and funny enough, it says it's going to do a server core VM, but it does a full image of full Windows Server with the GUI. So that's another piece of feedback I'm going to provide to the guys as well to say, hey, this is not server core. And what it does is it skips all these features, all these steps. So you can skip all the way down to step 4. So if you hit deploy to Azure, it'll have Docker, it'll have all that environment variables set up. It'll have the base container images ready for you to go. And then you can go here down to 4 and start playing around with the images from there. Okay, so once you deploy that to Azure, and away you go from there. That then deploys. I love that. How many times does that happen when you do a demo with Azure? Your session expires. Always.
They don't see you, they didn't see you. Password. Well, it's recorded. I've never done that.
No, you've never done that.
And then you get the dot.
And you've never had the recovery web page happen on you? Like that? There you go. It's coming back. Hey, I'm just using your wireless here.
It's fiber.
It's fiber?
Yeah.
All right. So once that's actually done, we end up with a Windows Server running in Azure. Okay, so that's the best. That's one of the easiest ways for you to play around with containers themselves. What time do you normally finish? About 7:30? Okay.
Yeah, unless anyone needs to rush off to watch, I don't know, or Desperate Housewives of Melbourne or Ruin. If you're not watching Ruin on,
All right. So this was I went through that deploy to Azure. Okay. And of course, with the ARM template, we give you a bunch of, some parameters that you can change. You can change the VM series that you want to choose. I chose DS2, I think. So that had 7 gig of memory. Good to have a little bit of memory if you want to run a bunch of containers. And then it created this container host, which is running Windows Server. And I think I've already got this already peed into this guy. So you end up with this VM. Okay. So you end up with a VM, and it says it's server core, but it's got the full GUI on it for some reason. So you can just do your Docker images, and what you end. Again, I tried. You saw me. I was there doing this beforehand. So, and you end up with Windows Server Core and Nano Server. So these are the two ones that you end up with. And you notice here that differences in size. Okay, so Nano Server is 969 meg, and Windows Server Core is almost 8 gigabytes. All right, so the reason why we really want to push towards Nano Server, if we're talking containers, we're not talking massive, sizes that we want to look at. They're actually working to try to get that smaller as we move towards the release of Windows Server later on down the track. So that's later this year. All right, now before I go and talk about the container service, I'll just show you quickly what we're doing in. Actually, I'll go quickly and talk about the container service, and then we'll move on into show you a little bit what it looks like. Now, I'm going to switch over to slides. I could go on for ages with demos and stuff like that. But the things I wanted to kind of get across to you guys is that this is not just something we're bolting on to Windows. This is something, I'll get to you in a sec, yep. This is something we are deeply integrating into the operating system. They've made core changes to Windows to accommodate containers and the partnership we have with Docker. All right, so that's a really big thing that we're doing. So if you look at this, I'll take your question first before we move on though. Yeah. 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 That I don't know. I'd have to.
I mean, you can install anything, just like installing anything. So you can install like.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we're actively on GitHub, so we're doing a lot of that work on GitHub and also on Docker's Hub as well. All right, so.
With that, can I ask you, so just to check the question?
Yeah.
With that, so for the Windows server-based images that make the server,
Like MySQL
or whatever, those images would be only supported once server 2016 ships with this capability.
Correct.
That's
correct. Now, if I look at this and I do so for example, let's Control-C this guy because that doesn't want to work. So if we do a Docker search and we do Microsoft, right? You'll notice a little column over on the right-hand side. Oh God, go away. See, I don't normally wear my glasses when I'm typing on the computer because I'm the other way around. I'm long-sided. Okay, see that little column there that says official? It has OK next to that, then it's supported, right?
Library matching place so that you, for example, only use MS SQL 2060 on
That's probably a question I'm probably going to have to take offline and do some research on that. All right. So I might post that to the meetup because that's one I don't know at this point. One thing I learned a long time ago: never be afraid to say you don't know. It's okay. So I will find out for you though. All right. So you notice that there's a couple of columns. There's a description. There's star rating is good, right? So it gets lots of star ratings, meaning that it works really well. And then you've got official, and then you've got automation over on the right there, I think is what that is. Whether there's some automation capability built into that, right? So that's kind of what that's there. But the partnership that we have, I think Scott Gu was the guy that announced our Docker partnership in 2014. So we have a joint strategic investment with Docker. You know, obviously it's an open source engine that's been around for a little, what, 2 years, 3 years? They're a fairly young company. That you run anyways, all right? So we have that enables Docker toolset to manage that application using both Linux and Windows containers, regardless of whether it's the host or cloud provider. So service provider, you've seen this little diagram before with Microsoft. Azure Service Provider or the customer data center. Wherever you want to actually run it, we'll do that. Azure supports the Docker open orchestration APIs. All right, so we support that. We have done this. If you look at the development we've done for the Docker engine in Windows Server, it's an open source project. We open source .NET, remember? We've open sourced .NET. So it's an open source development with Windows Server. It's a strategic investment for us going forward. It's kind of hard if you've been a Windows person for a long time to kind of get your head around all this. Why is Microsoft doing this? You know, it's kind of a change in the way that Microsoft is moving forward. All right. We'll federate our hub images into the Docker, the Azure Gallery and Portal. Okay, so there's other places you can get that. If you want to, some of these are actually being stood up as ARM templates on the Azure Quick Start Templates location. Right. For example, I'm going to show you the Azure Container Service where I do a DC Apache Mesos. There's an ARM template for that as well. So this is what it looks like. All right. So we want to bring Windows Server containers to the Docker ecosystem. All right, to really kind of help those two communities come together. Docker Hub is where you're seeing a lot of these images being stored. We're actively working very closely with Docker on this. We have the Docker engine for Windows Server, and will be developed under Aegis of the Docker open source project. Okay, so it's not just a bolt-on. It is very, very deep in regards to that. So, you know, that's what Docker X. You saw me. I've been doing Docker images, Docker Run. I can do Docker Compose. Everything you can do in Docker on Linux, you can do on Windows. All right, so that's kind of where we're going with this, and that's the main thing about this. So where do we see containers from a support ecosystem? Distributed compute, scale out. So if you have an application that requires scale out, scale up, scale down, databases, tasks, web, very good part for where we actually use containers, okay? Container operating system is environment. Nano Server is really where you're seeing where us actually move forward with this. This is our born in the cloud operating system. If you look at, go for it. Licensing, ha! Do you know anything about licensing? Because I don't. So one of my, these are not the licenses you're looking for. So remember I said I've been at Microsoft for 20 blah, blah, blah years? I've never had to do licensing. That's an achievement in itself, right? So if you really need to find out about it, I can find out for you later on. We have some licensing people. You probably know more about licensing than I do. So to give you a bit of background on Nano Server, they looked at, you know, Jeffrey Snover was the guy that is behind Nano Server. If you know who he is, he's kind of the father of PowerShell, right? So he's the guy that wrote PowerShell. And he's now working on the Nano Server project. And when they looked at Nano Server, they looked at how Windows runs today, how Windows was born, you know, from back in the NT 3.5 days. You know, it was client-server computing. Cloud wasn't something that was really kind of going on. Nano Server, we had to actually look at, you know, how we actually run a cloud service. Right now, I think, Simon talked a little bit about some news in Azure. We've got 34 regions around the world now. And we're expanding Azure, you know, the Azure footprint quite dramatically. And we need an operating system that is highly optimized for PaaS V2 applications and born in the cloud applications. All right, and that's what NanoServer is there for. So they looked at it and they got very, very hardcore about what they were going to have in there, and they got down to I think they're at 2 reboots per year with NanoServer. It's a 400 meg footprint. It's what they call just-in-time OS. Okay, it's just enough OS to run the core things in there. All right, and there's only a certain number of roles that run in NanoServer. Containers is one of the target areas for NanoServer. You can still do server core. Now, the reason why server core is there is because we know we are in a world where we have to still be compatible. This is Microsoft's thing over the last few years, is we've always been a very deeply compatible operating system. So if you still have traditional applications that run the old way, or you got old applications, which I've talked to many customers, they have tons or thousands of applications that they no longer know who the developer is. You still got to run it on a compatible OS, and server core is there for that reason. We still have the GUI in Windows Server. All right, but we're really pushing people to move away from the GUI. You should never have a GUI on your server. Never have a GUI on your server. I know it's our fault that you have a GUI on your server because we were the ones that told you in the first place, right? But now we're telling you something different. Is because and you mentioned the cattle versus pets thing, right? Do not treat your servers as pets. Okay, it's cattle. We don't do that in Azure at all. If something fouls, we just rip it out, put another one in, right? So that's kind of how we have to look at this a little bit as we move forward. So, Windows Server is changing. 2016 is probably the biggest operating system change that we've had in probably 20 years. All right, so it's a huge change. You got to get your head around PowerShell. If you don't know PowerShell, if you don't know how to do the container stuff, the Docker stuff, that's something you need to get your head around. You don't want to be managing at scale, managing on a GUI, right? So you want to take that away from there as well. Now, there's a number of different tools. Obviously, you can choose a wide range of development environments, okay? So you've got, obviously, container management right at the top. Right now, we are still doing PowerShell, but we're deprecating a lot of the, for example, get-container image or new container image. That kind of stuff is being deprecated in favor of lining up with Docker. Okay, so we're taking a lot of that stuff out. If you go into TP5 and you do some of the PowerShell commandlets, you will actually see that some of that has actually been taken out. It's starting to be taken out. And like I said, it'll go across all those different ones. Azure, on-premises, service provider. No changes as you move that code up. Yep. Yep, we have templates for that already up in Azure right now, and I'm going to show you one of those now. You have the ability with the Azure Container Service, which I'll talk about in a second, to deploy your Azure Container Service to do Apache Mesosphere, okay, either using DCOS or Swarm. All right, you have those two options, and we have templates for that as well in the Azure Quick Start templates as well, all JSON based. So this is kind of talking, development frameworks, pretty much everything. All right, so we're supporting everything. If you think about it now, Microsoft is a much more open source company than we were 2 years ago. All right, so very much a big change in regards to that. Now, what's next for containers on Azure? Okay, so we have what we call the Azure Container Service. Okay, so this is ACS, which is now, I think it GA'd, April? It's been GA'd for a little while. Watch the price tag, because I looked at this and I was like, it gives me like price that I'm going to do. I'm going to delete my cluster that I show you when I get like tomorrow morning, I'd say, because I'm going to start paying a lot. But you see, we've got the ability to do Swarm, Compose, Marathon, or Apache or DCOS, right? And that is through a template. Okay, so this allows us to streamline through ARM templates, through JSON, to streamline our provisioning of Apache Mesos clusters. Layered support for Swarm, Marathon, and Kronos, Docker tooling and API, integrated API and scaling, Linux and Windows Server, both public and private cloud. All right, so that's there. And let me show you where we're going is we're kind of moving towards this, what we call microservices. You've probably heard this term, microservices. We often get the question, is microservices the same as containers? Containers is kind of a tool set for microservices, I guess you could say. But Service Fabric is kind of what we're doing. I mean, that's a whole other topic itself. Have you done Service Fabric yet?
Yeah,
Oh, you had Mick.
in February.
Was he on time?
He was on time.
Good, because I always remind Mick about the time he missed a TechEd presentation in Sydney. Remember when TechEd was in Sydney that year? Mick was stuck in traffic, and he rings me, and he goes, I go, really? You're stuck in traffic? Are you kidding me? So we had to cancel a session and make it another day. So we never let him forget that. I tell you what, it's hilarious. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit about this, but I want to give you a couple of links. If you go to aka.ms/containers, that's where you can get that as well. And then Mark Rosinovich has done a talk. It's probably a little bit old now, I'd say, about Docker, Windows, and trends. There's more updated stuff on the containers channel. Microsoft was recently spoke at DockerCon 16. So we've got a number of talks up on the containers channel about all kinds of different things in regards to this. So have a quick look at that. But let me show you what this thing does. First of all, we'll show you. All right, so if you go up to and just go up to GitHub and do a search for Azure Quick Start templates, you will see a number of templates that are there. I did click that. It hasn't clicked. Oh, okay, what you see here is these two. We've got an ACS, Azure Container Services, using DCOS, Mesos, and Swarm. Okay, they're all available as quick start templates in GitHub projects. So you can just clone these down, run them in Visual Studio, and deploy them out of Visual Studio if you want to, right? Now, the other thing you can do is you can just go here, do a search in the marketplace, and do a search for containers. Actually, it's down here. You notice we have containers. And if you do see all, okay, you have your Azure Container Service, and you see we have a service cluster, we have a Docker on Ubuntu server, DCOS on Azure, Docker Data Center are all within this container service. And when we click Create here, this is going to cost you a shit ton of money. All right, so I think it says at some point to be very careful. All right, so
It's only letters in the middle. Is that the terminology?
see, I've been married to my wife for 16 years, and this is her language. My daughter has a swear jar at home, and my wife's got the most in the swear jar. So when you go and create this, all right, so when you go and create this particular thing, obviously in a DevOps world, we wouldn't be doing this from the portal, right? This is really just to illustrate what we were doing. If we were doing this in a DevOps world, we'd be doing it sort of with Visual Studio Team Services, and we'd be doing it with continuous integration and continuous delivery, right? So we can put on I can't get, now you have to have a public key. So you're gonna have to use PuttyGen to generate a private key. All right, so when you generate, so if everybody familiar with Putty, Putty is our SSH tool. So you got to use PuttyGen to generate a key. That goes into that box there. And then once you've actually done that, then you get the second step is you can choose to use DCOS or Swarm, whichever one you want to do. I think I chose DCOS. Now it's recommended when you go up to the page to create a resource group for each ACS container service that you do, so that you can keep them all together. So like all good cooking shows, I've gone through all these steps earlier. It did take about 20 minutes or so, and it was all ready to rock and roll. And I've pinned this to my dashboard. So what you end up with, after you do that, in about 15 to 20 minutes, you end up with all this. This is why, so what we end up using for this is virtual machine scale sets. Okay, so we have scale sets. You choose the number of masters and agents that you want to have in this scenario. We set up our master availability set. We set up our master IP that we're going to use to monitor this, because they have a web page that you can actually monitor this with. I just can't get to it. We couldn't figure it out earlier. We were mucking around trying to do it. And you see all the stuff that it creates. So you can see why that you're going to be careful about that. So I'm going to be checking that. And the really cool thing about this is it has resource costs down here. So this will tell me, which is really good, I suppose, because it's telling you how much this, oh, 0 is good so far. Okay, good. Because I get a bill every month. I'm on one of those internal consumption Azure plans, so I guess got to be careful about that. So the other good thing you can do with this, and this is the whole DevOpsy thing here, is you can actually go and export this as a template. All right, so you can take that whole deployment. Some of them can't be exported, but you can export this out, and you can see all the parameters that are there, the JSON scripts that you can then bring into Visual Studio. All right, so you can take that out, and you can use this because if you want to start to automate this, if you change parts of the application or something like that, you can automate that entire process. And you see the different things in CLI, PowerShell, .NET, and Ruby.
That capability is quite new. Last time the key challenges was visualizing stuff you've already deployed by the portal. I don't think everything has got that capability yet.
Starting to make its way in there, yeah.
That option in most of the resource management plays is there now, so if you see it, you can generally extract the definition of that.
Now Simon's going to laugh because this is Visual Studio. I'm not a developer. I can install Visual Studio. I can get a few of the plugins working. But one of the things I wanted to show you here is I've got an ASP.NET Core application, just a sample application that I've got. And what we've added is Docker integration with Visual Studio. So I can right click on this and I can go add, and I can add Docker support. Okay, so we have the ability, then what you'll see is it'll add some Docker container stuff to the project. All right, so you'll see some stuff added. You see some Docker type targets, some launch setting JSON stuff that gets added to the project. So that project now can be deployed into a container using Docker commands. All right, so it's in preview 3, I think, at this point in time. So it's in preview. It's just tools, updates, and add-ons just added in. You have to have the .NET Core installed as part of that. So you'll need that to be installed first. All that, and you have that integration there. All right. Update 3, the community edition or whatever edition that you have at that point in time. So, alrighty, it is 20 to 8. We're an hour early. That says 20 to 9. So, shake a bit. So, any other? That's about all I think I have the energy to talk to you at this late at the time. But hey, it's a meetup, so let's be honest, right? I haven't had a beer yet, so there you go. Any other questions? What do you think about what we're doing in regards to containers and stuff like that? Awesome sauce? Yeah? Yes, up the back. AppV. Well, AppKey, so questions around do you see containers replacing AppV? Not at this point in time. I have seen that AppV has been updated with the latest updates to MDOP. So MDOP is our desktop optimization pack. That's really, that particular issue is solving the issue of, say you needed 2 versions of Office or whatever on a machine and you need to virtualize the application layer, right? So it's kind of a different scenario. I haven't heard anything around whether AppV is going to get replaced when it comes to containers, but you never know. Haven't heard anything yet at this point in time.
Makes sense. And it's kind of crossing technologies there where you virtualize the application, but you just got the operating system with it.
Yeah, there's a few things that we have that people have asked about what AppV is doing in that space. I'm not much of an AppV expert. I don't tend to play around in that space too much, but I can't see it replacing it at this point because that's more of a client side thing that we need to have for virtualizing the application. All right. But if you haven't already got Windows 10, get the anniversary update, add containers. I'll share that PowerShell script. I'll tidy it up a little bit before I.
It comes with AppV.
What's that?
The Windows 10 anniversary edition actually ships a version of AppV.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Especially if you have a service book, the anniversary update solved bucket loads of problems.
What problems? There's no problems with the Surface.
Sorry,
Added features. All right. Well, we might.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah, no features.
We might end the session officially there. So if anyone's going to make a move, first of all, thanks to Jeff for coming in this evening.
I apologize for some of the stuff not quite working, but you know
it's a user group, as you said. So
I'm still upping myself on a lot of this stuff. They told me July 1, you need to change your focus. Oh, okay. Right. Got to find out what this DevOps thing is.
Okay, so and we're going to stop the live broadcast there. Thanks a lot for coming along, guys. If you want to hang around, just going to be here for a while. I'll be here for a while. There are other guys here that can help answer questions if you've got any. Thanks a lot for coming, everybody. I hope you.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time. Awesome. Thanks.